Welcome to the Unlist. Today I have a fairly unique episode concept for you today. As you can tell by the title of the video, Chanuary. Well, Chanuary is something that we started on Bass Notes a few years ago. And it's basically a month-long celebration of Chanel. Now I know some of you out there aren't fans of Chanel. You're not big Chanel people, as it were. So in that case, this video is probably not for you. And like a lot of larger houses, such as Dior, Hermes, Yves Saint Laurent, Giorgio Armani, you're going to have the people who are all about the house, and then people who are just kind of like fair weather. I like this fragrance. I like that fragrance. Then you've got the folks who have a chip on their shoulder about the house, something that makes them avoid the house entirely and doesn't really give any fragrances they make a fair chance. So I can only speak to people in the first two categories with this video. So if you're a super fan or just a casual enjoyer of some fragrances from the brand, this might be a fun watch for you. Otherwise, I don't know. I've got other episodes you can watch. Not a big deal, right? No one has to get hurt over this. So, Chanuary, the month-long celebration of Chanel. And why not? They are the first properly successful designer fragrance brand. They are the brand that literally set the precedent for just about all other designer fragrance brands to follow. Yes, they are not the very first, but they are the first that used the logo and name of the primary designer on the brand of perfumes and were sold in the boutique with the other items the designer made. They weren't considered a separate business venture. It was treated as just another accessory. So when you went into a Chanel boutique, or back then, the Chanel boutique, the only one that Gabrielle had, well, you could buy the hats and gloves, you could buy one of her other articles of clothing, and then you could accessorize with a bottle of perfume, which in those days would have been only one, would have been number 5. Although a few others would begin rolling out in years subsequent due to the overwhelming success of number 5. So fast forward to now, and Chanel is one of, they are not the top dog anymore, but they are still one of the top dogs in the designer fragrance game. They don't tend to follow trends. Quite opposite. They usually set those trends, although they have been guilty of following on a few occasions where they find themselves falling behind. Someone else got the jump on the hottest, newest thing, and then they had to play catch up. And we will notice releases like that as I bring them up. This is not a full-on history of House Chanel. That would be something that I think 2 or more videos would be needed to fully handle appropriately. This is more or less just a celebration of the house in video form. I will talk about a few of my favorite Chanel stories where I am personally involved with wearing or using a Chanel product. Plus, I will bring up a few other fun little historical anecdotes in random order throughout the video. So overall, we are just effectively celebrating this house for what it is, and not criticizing it for what it isn't, right? So anyway, getting started, my favorite Chanel fragrance of all time, the one I have worn the most of, hands down, is probably going to be Chanel Pour Monsieur from 1955, and its 1989 counterpart, the Pour Monsieur Eau de Toilette Concentré, these days known as Eau de Parfum, as it was redesignated in 2000 and I believe 16, could be 14, but it got a name swap. It stopped being called Eau de Toilette Concentré and it became Eau de Parfum because Chanel dropped that Eau de Toilette Concentré designation across its lines. So other fragrances like Allure Homme Edition Blanche also were renamed as Eau de Parfum. And all of the Eau de Toilette fragrances that existed in the Less Exclusifs line also were bumped up to Eau de Parfum. I'm not sure if that had to do with IFRA regulations triggering reformulation or if it was a marketing switcheroo, because let's be honest, Eau de Toilette Concentré is a bit of a mouthful. Eau de Parfum is a little bit easier. I don't know. Okay, I wasn't there, but I can only guess it was somewhere in between those two concepts. So, Pour Monsieur is my favorite and most worn Chanel fragrance, which is funny because it's also the first one. Although, I would be lying if I told you that it's my favorite because it's the first one. So I'm not like being the gatekeeper vintage snob guy. Oh, it's the oldest one, so it's automatically the best. The oldest perfumes are always the best. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it happens to be the oldest one, but also happens to be my favorite. Complete and total coincidence, okay? And the way I discovered it is probably why it's my favorite. So, it was the first Chanel fragrance I ever bought. And I actually bought the 89 Concentré first. So, because it was the only one that was commercially available in the United States. Those of you out there who aren't super into Chanel history may not be aware, but the original Chanel Pour Monsieur was not sold in the US as Chanel Pour Monsieur. It was sold as Chanel for Men. That's how it was released in 1955. In the UK, it was also given a different name. It was called A Gentleman's Cologne by Chanel. That's how it was named. And in both markets, it was sold until about the early 80s. When Antaeus hit the market in 1981, both of those fragrances were effectively shelved. Chanel, I guess, thought it was time to just restart, that they didn't want to have two men's fragrances. They only wanted to have one masculine flagship set. So they shelved the For Men and A Gentleman's Cologne and replaced them both with Antaeus. Now, there were a lot of guys who were very miffed by that. They didn't like that. So Jacques Polge was basically assigned to create a new Pour Monsieur that would be a global selling fragrance. And thus he created Pour Monsieur Eau de Toilette Concentré, the first one I bought. When I bought the fragrance, it was the only one I knew about, so I didn't realize it was a do-over, right? I didn't know this. And I loved it. Very soft, pillowy, petitgrain, lavender, nice oak moss accord, very rich. Some people back when I bought my first bottle in the 2000s thought it was a bit stuffy and old manish, but I didn't care. I thought I smelled like $1 million. So, and I wore it because I thought it smelled like $1 million. Chanel was kind of the highest brand anyone was aware of where I come from. So back in Baltimore where I grew up, people didn't know about Creed or Bond No. 9 or Serge Lutens or none of that stuff. People weren't aware of any of that. People weren't aware of Frederick Malle, nothing like that. So Chanel was top dollar. If you lived in Baltimore, if you grew up in Baltimore City, Chanel was kind of top dollar. Chanel or Dior were top dollar. So I bought that, and I wore it a lot. And then I discovered that there was a different bottle, a slim column bottle. And I was confused because it was just Eau de Toilette. Didn't have concentrate on it. And it was also a higher quantity for a lower price because the concentrate was a 75 ml bottle and sold for back then about $90. Whereas the one I was looking at was 100 ml for like 70-ish bucks back then. And I'm like, what is this? This is weird. So I didn't buy it for a number of years. Little did I know what that fragrance was. Reintroduced Chanel for Men under its original French market name of Pour Monsieur. And of course, the reason being that enough people cried and complained outside of the French territory, outside of Europe, that Chanel decided to go ahead and relaunch it for the world once again. But this time around, give it the same name in all markets. So when Chanel Pour Monsieur Eau de Toilette Concentré came out in Europe, it confused a lot of people because it sat alongside the original, which never went away, never got discontinued. And of course, when other countries got the concentrate and that became the replacement fragrance, a whole generation of older men were displaced. They lost their fragrance. They lost their Chanel for Men. So they saw Pour Monsieur as a new fragrance. They didn't realize that the fragrance they once loved was called Pour Monsieur in France. They thought it was for men, a gentleman's cologne, whatever. So when that fragrance returned under its original name in the Anglophone markets, people were like, there's two of these. What are they? They were entirely different fragrances. Those of you who know, the original one, which I love, is a sheep. It still has a similar petitgrain opening. Doesn't really have too much by the way of lavender in it, though. It goes more into a geranium, cardamom structure, and then that pillowy, narrowly sort of soapy, mossy, what people describe as a fine French milled soap kind of a base, which is why it's so lovely. It's so genteel, so discreet, so refined. Just not a very strong fragrance, clearly not a very powerful fragrance. Made in the 50s, right? Fragrances weren't designed to be like that in the 50s. So to me, I thought that was actually better than the one I had before, the concentrate one. So when my concentrate bottle began to get low, I switched over to the older one. It's so weird. Most folks would go the other way. They would go from the older one to the newer one and be happy. I went from the newer one to the older one and I was happy. Then they discontinued it again for the US market. UK got to keep it this time, and most of Europe has it. But over here in North America, we don't get to have it anymore. So I had to do the frantic thing and buy a bunch of backups, right? But the funny thing is, when I got my first bottle of that fragrance in, it was actually my second attempt to buy it. So this is the story I got. When I first purchased Pour Monsieur, the original, because it was different and I wanted to know what it was, I had just moved at that point out here to Seattle. So this is 2015, yeah, mid-2015. And for whatever reason, Chanel had my address correct. I had changed it in their system. But the UPS delivery service, for whatever reason, tried to send my bottle to my old address in Baltimore. So it went to the wrong coast. And I tried everything in my power to redirect that package, to change it, but the UPS system is so boneheaded and so esoteric that they frankly just don't care. They don't want to redirect. They would rather get put on a street corner and let someone steal it and then, reimburse the shipper than try and stop it and redirect it. It's too much effort for them. They don't care. So the first bottle was delivered to whoever was living at my old address. They got a free bottle of Chanel. I got my money back, and I ordered it a second time, and the second time I got it. But there was a bit of an ordeal, and it made me a little bit wary, honestly, of UPS for a while. No offense if any of you out there work for UPS. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to attack you personally. It was just a really god-awful experience, and I will never forget it because it was associated with my first purchase of this now favorite Chanel of mine, right? Now, other Chanels I greatly appreciate is Antaeus, this one. And this fragrance, I also have a fun story with. So, when I bought my first bottle of this, okay, I bought it from Neiman Marcus before they disappeared from like everywhere, and they only exist now in Texas where they started at. All the other branches are gone. They only have their one store now. But back then, they were still a chain. And I went to the Neiman Marcus that was here in Bellevue. So yeah, I actually haven't owned this for very long. It's not like I've been wearing this for 20 years. I'm relatively new to the world of Antaeus since like 2017, 18, around that time. So about 6 years or so, 7 years, I've been using this. So got my first bottle, Neiman Marcus, and I assume, like most people, that they have the newest inventory, that people buy stuff regularly and it sells and they replace it, right? So when I bought my first bottle of Antaeus from Neiman Marcus, I thought it was a new bottle. I assumed it was a brand new bottle, because why wouldn't it be, right, coming from Neiman Marcus? Well, I was mistaken, because when I bought the bottle and I opened it, it had a silver logo up here. not this one. And I didn't know any better, so I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's got a silver logo. And I began wearing it, and it was really nice. It was really good. It's Antaeus, right? It's going to be good. So I was wearing it, and then someone goes, hey, if you like that modern bottle, let me show you what vintage smells like. And I'm like, okay. So then a friend of mine on Bass Notes, he shipped me a decant of deep vintage, okay? And I'm guessing it wasn't the first bottle. It wasn't the original splash, right, with the screw-on cap, but it was one of the early sprays that had a silver top, like my bottle. So I got it in, and I began to spray it and began to wear it, and I was like, gee, I don't really smell any difference in this. It smells the same to me. And you know, you never want to tell a really hardcore vintage guy that their deep vintage sample smells the same as your new bottle, because then he just flips shit. They want to just murder you, okay? That's it. They want to strangle you in your own intestines and roast your corpse over a fire for their children to sup upon, right? Really graphic imagery for you, but that's what they want to do to you. They want to fillet you alive. So I did that. I'm like, yeah, this decant of yours smells the same as my new bottle. And oh, it was hell. The mods had to come in, delete messages. It was ugly. This guy was like, I hate you, you know, I never want to see you. Don't you ever come around my neighborhood, or I'm a black in your eye, whatever. He got really indignant, okay? I felt bad. I mean, I didn't feel bad because I don't care if I hurt someone's feelings, especially over perfume. It's kind of stupid. But I still felt bad that I sent the person packing, right? Like I broke the illusion or something. And then come to find out, I went to another store. It was Nordstrom in Seattle, okay? And I went there, and they had Antaeus, and it was this one. And it didn't have the big collar. It just was this one, like this, like you see here. So then I was like, oh, that looks different from mine. And then I began to really look into it. And I began to go on the Raiders of the Lost Scent. You guys know that blog. It's an infamous blog that has information about different formulas. I went on there, and I began digging around a little more. Come to find out, like my bottle of Antaeus from Neiman Marcus, brand new sealed, I guess, was like a really old bottle. I mean, I don't know if it was from the 80s, like I said, but it was definitely 90s maybe. It was old, though. So it was already like a 20-year-old bottle when I bought it. Like, they sold so little of this fragrance at this location, or it was just an old bottle that had gotten circulated through their warehouse system. However it happens, but it was an old bottle magically in their inventory. And the Bellevue location is gone now. And that location wasn't 20 years old, so it couldn't have sat in that store for 20 years. That store was not there for 20 years. It wasn't there for 20 years. It had to have come from somewhere else. But I bought it, and it was an old bottle. It was vintage. So suddenly it made sense to me. I'm like, you know what? The reason why my new bottle smells the same as my former friend's decant, it's not a new bottle. I bought an old bottle at retail by accident. Paid $100 for it. Probably sells for $300 now, right? On eBay or whatever. Expensive. But I bought it. So then you know what I had to do, right? Of course, you know, I had to buy a new bottle. Because now that I had been lied to, and I was wearing vintage Antaeus, thinking it was new, okay? This is a mind blower. Now I had to buy a new bottle to see if there really was a difference. And yes, boys and girls, there is a difference. There's a very clear difference. This does not smell the same as the one that has the silver cap on it. Is it the same fragrance? Yes, absolutely. It's the same fragrance. But there are pronounced differences, okay? This version is much sharper, more sheer, okay? I want to say it's a little bit cleaner. It also has a bit more sourness in the opening, whereas the deep vintage is richer, and thicker and fuller. The castoreum is obviously much more present. The oak moss is full and uncut. So it is a much more, I guess you could say it's a much more decadent experience with the deep vintage. So like the original Antaeus is like fudge, okay? It's like a rich grandma's fudge. This is more like a milk chocolate bar, okay? So you got the fudge brownie, which is the deep vintage, and you've got the milk chocolate bar. So they still both taste good, right? Chocolate is good, fudge is good, but they're on a different level from each other. You know, I wouldn't need a glass of milk with a chocolate bar, but I would need a glass of milk with a fudge brownie, right? Because the richness is there. That's how I describe old Antaeus and new Antaeus. They're both yummy, very, very yummy, but one is a bit more on the heavy side than the other, a little more decadent. And before I wrap up our celebration of Chanel, Chanuary, I will tell you one more story. And again, it's has to do with my stupidity and trying to buy Chanel from eBay, which you should never, ever, ever, ever do. Chanel is one brand that I'm like, you buy at retail, or you find someone you know who has vintage bottles that they are showing you the packaging. Otherwise, if it's a stock photo, if it's a new bottle, don't buy it, because there is like a 75% chance it is fake. I won't say it's like 100%, but it's more than 50%. It's greater than half and half, but less than 100%. So it's like 3 out of 4, it's going to be fake with Chanel, especially on eBay, Mercari, any of those kind of sites, any of those marketplace sites. Don't do it. Get it from pay the full retail price if you want a new bottle. Don't get it from eBay. Discounters don't really even get Chanel. They get sued by Chanel if they carry Chanel. Gives you an idea. So anyhow, my first bottle of Egoist was fake. The bottle wasn't fake, but the stuff inside was fake. So I tried to be the whole, let me get a vintage bottle, right? I want an old one, because someone had given me a decant, and I loved the decant. I didn't know what vintage it was. I just knew it was Egoist, okay? So I went online, I found a taller 100 ml spray bottle, and I bought it. So when I get it in, the juice looks way too clear, okay? Because the decant I had was a little bit more like a gold color. Wasn't dark, but was a little more gold color. This was water. Looked like water. And when I sprayed it, it felt like water. It didn't have that oiliness or the alcohol feeling. It felt like you would spray water from a spray bottle, like a little spritzer for your glasses. I'm like, oh, that feels weird. I could smell it. It did smell like Egoist a little bit, but it was very light and very dry. The sweetness, the sandalwood, the richness, the ambrette was not there. So, yeah, I got burned. I looked at the sprayer, and I saw a little hole where they could have pushed in a needle. So I know exactly what happened. They sucked the real juice out of that bottle, and they either diluted the rest with alcohol or something, or water, I think in this case, or they put something else in there. So, yeah, that went right in the bin, sadly. And then it happened one more time. I bought Bleu de Chanel because I didn't learn my lesson the first time. I'm a dummy. I got to make the same mistake twice before I'm good. So I tried to buy Bleu de Chanel because I wanted to smell the newest, you know, the thing that everyone was talking about. But I didn't want to pay $100 for it, okay? I didn't want to pay $100. So I bought a bottle of Bleu de Chanel off eBay, and the logo was crooked on the bottle. It said made in France instead of France, so P-R-A-N-C. And sure enough, also fake. So got burned again. In the bin it went. Okay, guys, Chanuary, celebration of Chanel. This has been The Unlist. Hope you enjoyed it.